Good evening. Welcome to my guests here in the studio and to Vaughan and Tanny, who are joining us down the line. And, of course, to our virtual audience, tonight you are from Swansea. Thank you very much for joining us for the programme this evening. And, of course, thanks to you for joining us at home and for watching. And if you want to join in the conversation, you can do it in the usual way, at BBC Question Time on social media. And let's hear what you've got to say. Right, we'll start with our first question, which is from Mike Jones.
Thanks, Fiona. As Boris Johnson has announced severe tier levels in England, should we all just be as strict as possible and buckle down to avoid another spike early in the new year?
Claire, should we all be as strict as possible and buckle down?
When we were told that we had to accept the lockdown, which a lot of people felt very unhappy about and felt that there was not enough evidence for a national lockdown, it was very much on the assumption that we would leave the lockdown and things might have improved. The reality is that over 23 million people have now, who had previously been living under tier 1, gone into lockdown, have now come out in higher tiers. It feels like perpetual punishment. And even the way we're talking about it, you know, are kind of released from certain restrictions, you know, whether the Prime Minister will allow us, and if we buckle down and then we can have Christmas. And the whole discussion around Christmas has been very much, you know, well, we are going to indulge you people who want their Christmas with their families for 5 days, but you're going to pay for it. And I'm afraid that the problem for me with this whole discussion is that we are free. We're supposed to live in a free society, in a democracy, but we're behaving as though we are in a pre-democratic time with some kind of fiefdom announcing and micromanaging exactly what we should do. So I think it's the opposite of getting consent, of bringing about trust, of encouraging people to take themselves seriously, because we are literally having discussions like this, technocratic. Would it mean this? Does it mean that? Should I dot the I or cross the T?
But given that we're in a pandemic, what's the alternative?
Yes, but there are ways of dealing with pandemics, lots of different possibilities.
You saw the response from Liverpool and the community in Liverpool and people actually coming out and working together, and they've done really well.
Yeah, but
that's the right way to do it in a democracy.
Social solidarity requires that people do not believe that arbitrarily their freedoms are taken away from them and that there's no balance of risks. The only thing that we face at the moment is not, you know, you say we're in a pandemic. We're in a pandemic. We also undoubtedly will talk about the economy. That pandemic is one of the things facing this society, as are very many others. And the way we've responded to that pandemic has created a tsunami, a pandemic of unemployment, of immiseration, of isolation, of the robbing of autonomy and of our freedoms and of our civil liberties. And at the very least, I should be able to say that without the inference being that I have not noticed we're living in a pandemic. I think it's important, and I think also, by the way, many of the local authorities that are now going to higher tiers, there's actually falling rates of coronavirus. Death rates are going down in relation to what they were. So what I'm saying is that we're told if only we accept this particular hard measure, all will be well. Well, we've just had a lockdown. We're not even out of it. And now we're being told we're going to have hard tiering and you've got to behave, otherwise we won't have Christmas. And then at Christmas you've got to be sensible because otherwise you're going to pay for it. It's like some sort of religious cult we've entered into. And the one thing that nobody discusses is what this does for freedom and democracy in society. And I really think that's a very serious price to pay and should at least be debated fully.
I just wanted to say that I agree with the point I think it was Michael made about is it worth it just for a few days at Christmas. You know, we're talking about cases rising. It looks like cases are going to rise through December, and yet the green light's been given to people to meet at Christmas time, regardless of where we're at that point. And is it really worth it? A lot of us don't want to, yet we're all going to pay for it in January either way.
Okay, Rachel.
Hi, I just feel that the devolved governments have done so much better job of passing messages on than the Westminster government has done. I think it's been quite a learning opportunity for Westminster, if only they would actually pay attention to what the devolved governments are doing.
Peter?
I think it's important that we as a country all work together to reduce the risk to the most vulnerable. And if that means that we have to forgo time at Christmas with the ones that we love, then I think that is something that we should all do for the greater good.
Oh, okay. Briefly, Claire, yes.
Yeah, I think we all want to protect the vulnerable, but one of the problems with a lot of the lockdown measures, and that includes tiering systems, is the very people who are being neglected are the vulnerable. I mean, you can't visit people in care homes. They are lonely. Mrs. Smith in number 16 can't get any visitors. People with dementia in care homes are dying because they're not being stimulated. They've got no attention. The vulnerable are actually being neglected by our attempts at protecting the vulnerable.
And you can visit care homes in Wales, it's worth pointing out, given that our audience is from Swansea.
Yes, but it's also the case that there's been massive restrictions on visits on care homes in Wales. I'm from Wales and know people in care homes. The misery, the terror, the horror, the loneliness. We're making it sound as though, and then people have said, well, let's have Christmas then. I think people don't have to have Christmas if you don't want to, feel free. I think that we have to consider what it is we consider to be important about what it means to be alive, how we relate to people, what our relationships are like with people. And I think that just seeing it through COVID eyes only means that we neglect the hugely important social aspects of protecting people, of sociability, civility. Young people are having their lives thwarted, and people kind of talk about them going out and wanting to go and have a drink as though this is the most irresponsible thing in the world, and then we infantilise people in the process. Because we don't trust them. So when people say about trust, you can't have trust if you then say, but if you break the rules you'll be fined and you'll be accused of killing granny. You've got to actually trust people, and that requires a different approach to this, and I think it would actually be beneficial to the vulnerable to adopt that.
Right, let's take our next question now, which is from Jeanette Williams.
Hi, thanks, Fiona. Economic effect caused by COVID-19 will be felt for years. Should public sector workers expect pay rises whilst thousands from the private sector are faced with unemployment?
Claire.
I think it's really wrong, Vaughan, to talk about this decision as being about anyone saying that no one... You said no one is being told that... you said that people are being told that they don't deserve a pay rise. I don't think anyone is saying that. I think, actually, it is incredibly divisive at the moment to try and imply that public sector workers not getting a pay rise at this time, it's because, there's always the danger of the evil Tories hate the public sector. But let's consider what, for example, your, firebreak lockdown did in Wales to the people who run nail bars, to the hairdressers, to the people whose life savings have been absolutely destroyed, who face bankruptcy, who potentially are going to lose their homes. These people, I mean, nobody deserved to be told that they couldn't make a living. But there's as people keep reminding me, a pandemic, and the government brought in certain things. And furlough isn't sufficient. And many public sector workers are actually in a stronger position at the moment than in terms of job security than people in the private sector. The private sector is full of people who actually also were the invisible front line that kept us going. The people who dropped off to those people who enjoy working from home, who dropped off the Amazon, the Deliveroo drivers. All of these people deserve pay rises. We all deserve pay rises, but what I'd say is that misses the point. And you cannot be in a situation, and I can't understand why the Labour Party haven't worked this bit out. The Labour Party have been calling for stronger, harder, longer, deeper lockdowns since the beginning of this thing. They want to close the economy down and then seem to be shocked that there's an economic crisis that's going to be the greatest facing for not just decades, but for centuries. So we've got a major problem. At some point, somebody's got to create... We've got to have economic development, economic prosperity, industrialisation to create the facilities that allow a public sector, not the facilities, that make the money, that allow a public sector to exist in the first place, to highlight public sector as though they're the only heroes of this pandemic. I completely salute care workers and all the rest of it. I salute the public sector workers who worked. But my goodness, the people who didn't work weren't just lazing around doing nothing, working for the private sector, getting well paid. They've been absolutely treated with contempt and have been forgotten, and therefore don't be divisive about it.
Let's take another question from Shireen Al-Salihi.
Is it right to cut the foreign aid budget?
Claire.
I think it's... I really agree with Tanny sort of a bit of a bigger picture and a bit more complicated, because I think the idea that this cut means that you don't care about the global poor is a misunderstanding. And I'm not defending the Tories' cut, because I actually have got a bigger question about aid anyway. And I always thought that their legislation to have the 0.7% had an element of kind of moral grandstanding that I found distasteful, because I think that the way that you're a global leader is not, and I think it lacks imagination, that we think that it's only through aid. I mean, we need to have and be encouraging countries to develop. I'll tell you what's really hit developing countries at the moment is not this decision to cut the aid budget, but think about the garment workers in Bangladesh and the tourism industry in those developing countries. That Western decision, in my opinion, to have a disproportionate reaction to coronavirus has devastated their ability to have their own industries, their own autonomy, and so on and so forth. So they're suffering as a consequence of actions we do. And you can't just say, oh, well, aid would have compensated for that, because it wouldn't.
But, I mean, their own governments are also taking action against coronavirus.
Yes, but in different ways. But I'm saying, if you look actually at all of the global reports, they'll say that the devastating impact of the West's reaction of stopping people to travel and tourism, as I say, but also the industries. And, you know, if we really want to do something, I think that we should have no tariffs on, for example, you know, chocolate coming from Africa, parts of Africa where there's, you know, in post-Brexit Britain, there are all sorts of ways. In other words, I believe in more trade, not aid, if you want, but encouraging development rather than simply treating people as though they're going to have crumbs off the table of aid. We have to remember as well, you see, it sounds very nice, but aid is quite contentious. It's very political. Aid NGOs are like a big business, right? They're like multinationals, a lot of them are huge. It's not just straightforwardly going to the global poor. So I want to be able to query that, to at least ask questions, to have a complicated and sophisticated conversation. I'm not being funny about it, without people thinking you want to kill off the global poor, because that is actually not right. And I think global Britain, I do like the fact that there's been this attempt at saying that vaccinations will be shared. I thought one of the great things about the Oxford AstraZeneca thing was that vaccinations would go to those countries. So let's just see it as aid, because there's a slightly patronising aspect to that. If we think the only way that the global poor can ever stop being poor is if we give them handouts, usually with political strings, by the way. So I would be having a bigger conversation about aid, and it's not about being Little Britain and not helping people out. It's about being appropriate about what you do in terms of global poverty.
I want to try and squeeze in one more question from Michael Brannan.
Hello, thank you, Fiona. Coronavirus has led to all 4 nations taking their own approach to controlling the pandemic. Will this provide the ground that will support the notion of a Welsh independence vote?
Claire, we are very nearly out of time, but I just want to give you a chance to answer this question. The fact that coronavirus has led to the 4 nations taking their own approach in terms of controlling coronavirus.
I think it's been divisive. I don't actually think it's been helpful for the Union. I think it's also created a sense of confusion about the United Kingdom myself. I think it's wrong to suggest that if you've got politicians physically closer, that they're going to be more in touch with you. Let me assure you, as somebody from North Wales, having the Senedd in Cardiff, you know, there is a clique of people around the Senedd. That doesn't mean that people in North Wales feel like they're closer. It's a political question, not a physical one. And I think that there's been a huge amount of problems with the Welsh administration. School educational standards have been abysmal under the present administration. I was yesterday in the House of Lords looking at the mental health legislation where, thank goodness, the Coronavirus Act, which gave the power to sanction people with just one doctor and for a long time, which should never have been there in the first place, has been repealed. Wales have kept it on. I mean, don't ask me why, because it's absolutely draconian. We had Mark Drakeford telling us what was essential and inessential shopping. No, I don't necessarily think that the handling of the coronavirus, and by the way, all sorts of problems with testing at the beginning, and they did
I'm going to have to hurry you, Claire. I'm sorry, we're running out of
coronavirus into
time.
care homes in Wales. So, yeah, I think it's much more complicated than saying, oh, there you go, just shows Wales can go on its own then. No, it doesn't. It needs to be interrogated, and they need to be held to account for the mistakes they've made.
That's why we have elections.
Exactly.
I'm going to end it here, simply because we are running out of time. I'm so sorry, because I know I could see this could go backwards and forwards for quite some time. But our time is up, our hour is up. Tonight, our questions came from Swansea. Next week, we will be joined by an audience in Bath. And the week after that, Chelmsford. So do get in touch, come and join the debate. You can apply to the Question Time website and you fill in the form there, and let's see if you can come and be part of our audience. We would love to see you. Adrian Charles is coming up on Radio 5 Live with Question Time Extra Time, as always, with his guests, and you can see on the screen how to get in touch and put your views there. But for now, thank you very much to the panel here in the studio and to Vaughan and Tanny for joining me down the line. From our audience in Swansea, thank you very much for being part of the programme. And of course, to you at home, thank you very much for watching. From Question Time, bye-bye.